Go hang out with the broskies, so why not read a little something beforehand? Expanding the circle of influence. It is inspiring to realize that in choosing our response to circumstance, we powerfully affect our circumstance. When we change one part of the chemical formula, we change the nature of the results. I worked with one organization for several years that was headed by a very dynamic person. He could read trends. He was creative, talented, capable, and brilliant, and everyone knew it. But he had a very dictatorial style of management. He tended to treat people like goofers, as if they didn't have any judgment. His manner of speaking to those who'd worked in the organization was, go for this, go for that, now do this, now do that. I'll make the decisions. The net effect was that he alienated almost the entire executive team surrounding him. They would gather in the corridors and complain to each other about him. The decision was all very sophisticated, very articulate, as if they were trying to help the situation. But they did it endlessly, absolving themselves of responsibility in the name of the president's weaknesses. You can't imagine what's happened this time, someone would say. The other day he went into my department. I had everything all laid out, but he came in and gave totally different signals. Everything that I'd done for months was shot just like that. I don't know when I'm supposed to keep working. I don't know how I'm supposed to keep working for him. How long will it be until he retires? He's only 59. Someone else would respond, do you think you can survive for 6 more years? I don't know. He's the kind of person they probably won't retire anyway. But one of the executives was proactive. He was driven by values, not feelings. He took the initiative. He anticipated. He emphasized. He read the situation. He was not blind to the president's weaknesses, but instead of criticizing them, he would compensate for them. Where the president was weak in his style, he's trying to buffer his own people and make such weaknesses irrelevant. And he'd work with the president's strengths, his vision, talent, creativity. This man focused on his circle of influence. He was treated like a goofer also, but he would do more than what was expected. He anticipated the president's need. He read with empathy the president's underlying concern. So when he presented information, he also gave his analysis and his recommendations based on that analysis. As I sat one day with the president in an advisory capacity, he said, Stephen, I just can't believe what this man has done. He's not only given me the information I requested, but he's probably additional information that's exactly what we needed. He's provided additional information that's exactly what we needed. He even gave me his analysis of it in terms of my deepest concerns and a list of his recommendations. The recommendations are consistent with the analysis, and the analysis is consistent with the data. He's remarkable. What a relief not to have to worry about this part of the business. At the next meeting, it was go for this and go for that to all the executives. But to this man, it was, what's your opinion? His circle of influence has grown. This caused quite a stir in the organization. The reactive minds in the executive corridors began shooting their vindictive ammunition at this proactive man. It's the nature of reactive people to absolve themselves of responsibility. It's so much safer to say I'm not responsible. If I say I am responsible, I might have to say I'm irresponsible. It would be very hard for me to say that I have the power to choose my response and that the response I have chosen has resulted in my involvement in a negative, coercive environment, especially if for years I have absolved myself of responsibility for the results in the name of someone else's weaknesses. So these executives focused on finding more information, more ammunition, more evidence as to why they weren't responsible. But this man was proactive toward them too. Little by little, his circle of influence toward them grew also. It continued to expand to the extent that eventually no one made any significant moves in the organization without the man's involvement and approval, including the president. But the president did not feel threatened because this man's strength complicated his strength and compensated for his weaknesses. So he had the strength of two people, a complementary team. This man's success was not dependent on his circumstances. Many others were in the same situation. It was his chosen response to those circumstances, his focus on his circle of influence, that made the difference. There are some people who interpret proactive to mean pushy, aggressive, or insensitive, but that isn't the case at all. Proactive people aren't pushy. They're smart. They are value driven. They read reality and they know what's needed. Look at Gandhi. While his accusers were in the legislative chambers, criticizing him because he wouldn't join in their circle of concerned rhetoric, condemning the British Empire for their subjection of the Indian people, Gandhi was out in the rice paddies, quietly, slowly, imperceptibly expanding his circle of influence with the field laborers. A groundswell of support, of trust, of confidence followed him through the countryside, though he held no office or political position. Through compassion, courage, fasting, and moral persuasion, he eventually brought England to its knees, breaking political domination of 300 million people with the power of his greatly expanded circle of influence. The haves and the bees. One way to determine which circle our concern is in is to distinguish between the haves and the bees. The circle of concern is filled with the haves. I'll be happy when I have my house paid off. If only I had a boss who wasn't such a dictator. If only I had a more patient husband. If I had more obedient kids. If I had my degree. If I could just have more time to myself. The circle of influence is filled with bees. I can be more patient, be wise, be loving. It's the character focus. Anytime we think the problem is out there, that thought is the problem. We empower what's out there to control us. The change paradigm is outside in. What's out there has to change before we can change. The proactive approach is to change from the inside out, to be different. And by being different, to effective positive change in what's out there. I can be more resourceful. I can be more diligent. I can be more creative. I can be more cooperative. One of my favorite stories is in the Old Testament, part of the fundamental fabric of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery in Egypt by his brothers at the age of 17. Can you imagine how easy it would have been for him to languish in self-pity as a servant of Potiphar, to focus on the weaknesses of his brothers and his cantors and on all he didn't have? But Joseph was proactive. He worked on B. And within a short period of time, he was running Potiphar's household. He was in charge of all that Potiphar had because the trust was so high. Then the day came when Joseph was caught in a difficult situation and refused to compromise his integrity. As a result, he was unjustly imprisoned for 13 years. But again, he was proactive. He worked on the inner circle, on being instead of having. And soon he was running the prison and eventually entire nation of Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh. I know this idea is a dramatic paradigm shift for many people. It is so much easier to blame other people, conditioning, or conditions for our own stagnant situation. But we are responsible. Control our lives and to powerfully influence our circumstances by working on what we are. If I have a problem in my marriage, what do I really gain by continually confessing my wife's sins? By saying I'm not responsible, I make myself a powerless victim. I immobilize myself in a negative situation. I also diminish my ability to influence her. My nagging, accusing, critical attitude only makes her feel validated in her weakness. My criticism is worse than the conduct I want to correct. My ability to positively impact the situation withers and dies. If I really want to improve my situation, I can work on the one thing over which I have control, myself. I can stop trying to shape my I can stop trying to shape up my wife and work on my own weaknesses. I can focus on being a great marriage partner, a source of unconditional love and support. Hopefully my wife will feel the power of proactive example and respond in kind. But whether she does or doesn't, the most positive way I can influence my situation is to work on myself, on my being. There are so many ways to work in the circle of influence: to be a better listener, to be a more loving marriage partner, to be a better student, to be a more cooperative and dedicated employee. Sometimes the most proactive thing we can do is to be happy, just to genuinely smile. Happiness, like unhappiness, is a proactive choice. There are things like the weather that our circle of influence will never include. But as proactive people, we can carry our own physical or social weather with us. We can be happy and accept those things that at present we can't control, while we focus our efforts on the things that we can. The other side of the stick. Before we totally shift our life focus to our circle of influence, we need to consider two things in our circle of concern that mirror deeper thought: consequences and mistakes. Well, while we are free to choose our actions, we are not free to choose the consequences of those actions. Consequences are governed by natural law. They are out in the circle of concern. We can decide to step in front of a fast-moving train, but we cannot decide what will happen when the train hits us. We can decide to be dishonest in our business dealings, while the social consequences of that decision may vary depending on whether or not we are found out. The natural consequences to our basic character are a fixed result. Our behavior is governed by principles. Living in harmony with them brings positive consequences. Violating them brings negative consequences. We are free to choose a response in any situation, but in doing so, we choose the attendant consequence. And when we pick up one end of the stick, we pick up the other. Undoubtedly, there have been times in each of our lives when we have picked up what we later felt was the wrong stick. Our choices have brought consequences we would rather have lived without. If we had the choice to make over again, we would make it differently. We call these mistakes, and they are the second thing that merits our deeper thought. For those filled with regret, perhaps the most needful exercise of proactivity is to realize that past mistakes are also out there in the circle of concern. We can't recall them, we can't undo them, we can't control the consequences that come as a result. As a college quarterback, one of my sons learned to snap his wristband between plays as a kind of mental checkoff whenever he or anyone made a setting back mistake, so the last mistake wouldn't affect the resolve and execution of the next play. The proactive approach to mistake is to acknowledge it and instantly correct and learn from it. This literally turns a future failure into a success. Success, said IBM founder T.J. Watson, is on the far side of failure. But not to acknowledge a mistake, not to correct it and learn from it, is a mistake of a different order. It usually puts a person on a self-deceiving, self-justifying path, often involving rationalization, irrational lies to self and to others. This second mistake, this cover-up, empowers the first, giving it disproportionate importance and cause is far deeper injury to self. It is not what others do or even our own mistakes that hurt us the most. It is our response to those things. Chasing after the poisonous snake that bites us will only drive the poison through our entire system. It is far better to make measures immediately to get the poison out. Our response to any mistake affects the quality of the next movement. It is important to immediately admit and correct our mistakes so they have no power over the next moment and we are empowered again. I'll stop there. That last kind of small thing is very, very important. I mean, probably the most important thing that we can live throughout our lives is being able to learn from our mistakes. But also one of the things that I guess is very important to me, but I feel like this book also talks about, is being able to acknowledge that mistake. Be honest with yourself, kind of going back to that circle of influence, acknowledging it and criticizing yourself. Not criticizing, but saying, hey, I'm going to be honest with myself. I made a mistake. Sure, I'm going to acknowledge it, but I'm going to learn from it. And I think that's super important, right? And kind of tying back to what this book was also saying about being responsible versus irresponsible, right? If a responsible person or a proactive person makes a mistake, they're going to acknowledge it and they're going to say, hey, I messed up. I may have hurt some people. I may have hurt myself, but I'm going to learn from this and I'm never going to do it again. Okay? But someone that's irresponsible or someone that's maybe not so much of a proactive person, they're going to make a mistake and say, hey, someone else maybe made that mistake. Or they're going to think of like the circle of concern, and they're going to say they had no control, when in reality they had control over their mistake. Or better yet, when they make a mistake and they continuously make it, they say that this mistake or whatever's really going on in their life, they can't control it. In reality, they can. So I think that's super important on that aspect. But something that also caught my eye, let me see if I could find it. Hopefully I do. What was it about? Jeez. Oh, the haves and the bees. I think, when it talks about like naming the different things, I'll be happy when I have X, Y, and Z, or if I had more obedient kids. It's kind of going back to that thing where it's like it's very easy to blame someone else, but it's the hardest thing to look at yourself and say, hey, I could be better. Even on the aspect if I'll be happy when I have my house paid off, or I'll be happy when I have a nice car. I'll be happy when I have more money. Well, instead of thinking that way, why not just say, I can be more better. I can improve myself. I can be more compassionate, more empathetic. And to me, in my eyes, and many philosophers talks about this idea, is that if you look more inward and if you say, hey, let me work on some characteristic stuff, not materialistic stuff, I'm going to be a happier person. If I'm helping out others, or if I'm very confident in myself, I think that's going to make me a lot happier. And I think I live by that principle and value. And I feel like in this day and age, not many people live that way. I feel like, especially with social media and whatnot, they want to look at the next best thing, the next best photo, the next best like, the next best following, and whatnot. But I don't want to drag on this chapter or this reading. I think this has probably been my favorite one so far, because it talks about mistakes and it talks about the overall idea of what you might think can give you happiness versus actually looking inward and saying, hey, let me work on some stuff that could potentially and most definitely will make me happy. So, yeah.